So once in a while in the rooted community, someone raises a question. Well, questions are raised all the time in the rooted community, first of all, but sometimes the question is just too difficult to write an answer to. I have known for a while that we probably needed to address this topic of an old trend of having word walls and a new trend of having sound walls. And I realize that many of you are out there and you're interacting with a lot of different organizations, and you're hearing and learning all these things and trying to fit all the pieces together, and where do we fit in with that? It's very interesting because the questions morphed from what do you think about word walls to what about all these different vowel charts that are out there? Okay. So I'm going to make that same progression in this conversation. So first of all, when we talk about what you put on a wall, the biggest thing I want to say is, why is it on the wall? Okay. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, good reasons to put things on the wall. And trust me, I put things on the wall all the time, right? So sometimes we put things on a wall in our classrooms, schoolrooms, homeschool environments. Sometimes we put things on a wall because they serve as reminders. Sometimes we put things on a wall because they serve as celebrations of learning. And sometimes things go on a wall because they're both. And I think that it's really important that you think through that. Okay. So just because someone tells me something needs to be in a wall doesn't mean it does. Just because someone tells me, like we do, that maybe this would be good to put in a binder doesn't mean it needs to go there. And certainly it's not really helpful to put things on a wall that don't have the right learning behind it, okay? And don't have the right usage from it. So let's just talk about this idea of word walls. Why were there word walls? Okay, so just historically, word walls were part of a theory that the way kids learn to read was by seeing and exposure and sight word development. Okay, and the sight word development meant that I'm just kind of basking in this exposure, and I see words over and over again, and I have pictures that are associated with them, and someone reads it to me, and then I have opportunities to read it again and again and again. And because it's very repetitive in these books that are created for me, I have memorized these words. And also I have flashcards so I can memorize words. And that when we write, all we're doing, when we read, all we're doing is pulling from this huge network of sight words. And that when we write, all we're doing is producing this grouping and picking and choosing from this big bunch of sight words. And all of that was based on science and theory that is really, really outdated. And at times, I'm trying to think of how strong of a word I want to use. I mean, we actually have taught kids in the wrong way, and we've actually impeded their progress when we teach kids to just look and memorize and guess and constantly try to rely on context and pictures. That's not how the brain works. And it's actually teaching their brains to do a skill that works against reading. So we don't want that anymore. We don't want that I put the first 100 words on the wall and all you have to do is pick and choose from these words. And by the way, I've never really actually taught you how what you think and what you say can actually be translated onto paper. right? I've never taught that. I'm just giving you words to cherry pick. And it doesn't work very well. But that's not the same as saying, we had this fantastic lesson in science, and we learned these really interesting science words that are big and interesting. And we learned about the water cycle. We learned about metamorphosis. We learned about, how atoms split. We learned all the parts of an atom, whatever. And we've created these materials, and they represent this concept of our learning. And there's labeling all over these materials. And we put that on the wall. And we may, in fact, reference that in future learning. That's different. Or there's these really big words in the water cycle, like condensation, right? And so later, when we're writing more about what we know about the water cycle, I know that this word condensation is up there. And I can, in fact, I have that word in my vocabulary. I have an understanding of how it's used. I'm generating authentic writing. And I look up there to check my spelling. And by the way, I've also been taught condensation. So I also have been taught that I don't just look up here at the wall where it's written and write on my paper C-O-N. Instead, what I've learned is say. Okay, that's T-I-O-N, right? Or something like that. Or maybe then I say T-I-O-N. But I've actually learned this sound sequencing, syllable chunking, copying back and forth, whether from copy work on a table, in word building, in copying words and doing syllable work. I've learned how to chunk and look back and forth when needed. So I go to spell condensation. Oh wait, shun, I always forget, is that a T-I-O-N or an S-I-O-N? I have a resource. Now I have a lot of resources, but we actually made this product from our learning that's sitting up here, and that's useful to me to use. That's not a word wall. I believe my child creates sentences by pulling familiar words off the wall. I mean, I've been in classrooms where that's been happening, working with struggling writers. And what you get is time to write in your journal, I like to go to lunch. Next day's journal, I like to go on the playground. Next day's journal, I like to go to lunch. Next day's journal, I like to play on the playground, right? I don't know anything about what went on at lunch. I don't know anything about why you like lunch. I don't know what goes on the playground. I don't know who your friends are, right? That's not real journaling. And if I suddenly handed you another language and I said, here are the 10 words you can use in a sentence. I'll tell you what they are. Here's how you spell them. Make me a sentence. Okay, now tomorrow, make me a sentence again. And the next day, make me a sentence again. Your sentences are going to be the same. And I can add more words to that wall, but at some point that ceases to be meaningless. I'm just going to find the few words I know. So that's not real writing. That's not what we want. Now, we do have times when we're doing word study where we'll put together some really helpful spelling patterns. If you've taken, word study, like, there's the, or if you've watched or read, I think I did both a blog and a video or something. I think it was a blog where I took, it was at autumn, and I had shown how I did this study on all the WH words with one of my students, all the question words. And so there were all these things about these question words, and we were sorting them, and we were talking about what's the orthographic overlap in these question words. And we're discovering they mostly start with WH, and what do they mean? And then we kind of took the word where and showed its relationship to there and here, those place words. And then, there also is there, the place word that sounds the same as there, as in possession, and they are, the contraction there, right? And we've created we've done manipulatives, we've written, we've used them in our spelling, we've created binder pages. And darn, if those question words aren't still so difficult, do we want to put those on the wall? Well, I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want me creating a poster on the wall and the next morning, there it is. There's no ownership in that. But if we decide, hey, you know what? What's the one binder page that you just wish was on the wall? It's in your binder. We made a binder page out of it, and you are always opening your binder for that. And I'm glad it's in your binder, but what would we like on the wall? Let's make one. Let's make it together. I want to tell you, I had a student whose mom got this idea that she wanted him to create a personal dictionary of all the words he misspells. Okay. And so they started tracking these words that he commonly misspells. So first they're collecting them. And, I don't remember what, but these series of words that he commonly misspells. I mean, I have words I commonly misspell, right? So the first thing they did was collect them. And then they alphabetized them. And then they practiced writing them neatly, saying sounds while they write, and creating sound lines that they map those sounds onto, right? And then he creates this personal dictionary. He now has them alphabetized. He rewrites. They don't take pictures of it. They're not cutting these words out. They're not doing it on a computer. He hand writes each of these words on the page in alphabetical order. And I said to him about 3 months after all this, was started, and he showed it. He brought it in and showed it to me. And I said, do you use it very much? And he said, it's weird. I don't have to use it very much now. Mostly I just kind of think about it, and then I remember how to spell it. No kidding. What if instead the educator had said, I'm going to collect all the words that you have a hard time spelling. I'm going to alphabetize them, and I'm going to make you a little dictionary. Here's your dictionary. Go. It's really the process. And what goes on the wall has to represent the learning process. And kids have to have some stake in it. And they may not be as neat as you. If I have a child who has really severe dysgraphia, and when they write on that, when they write there, here, there, where, it's going to be really hard for us to read. I can do a couple things. I can have them make the model, and maybe another child do the one that goes on the wall, or they make the model and I'll do the final writing of it. Or I could have them build with tiles that, I've copied that they can build up there. I can have them, do more of the kind of production of it and thinking about it and where do they want it to go and how do they want it to look. But the actual writing, even though they practice, I would have them practicing it and designing on paper, but what goes up there really does have to be legible. And if their writing isn't legible, that could be a problem. but I'm still always trying to find that way that they are really involved in the process. Does that make sense? So that's how I feel about words. Does that make sense? And if your child really likes the binder and they're using the binder and you're feeling pressure to get stuff out of the binder and on a wall, you know, I mean, it's got to be functional, right? And I think what sometimes happens too is in a classroom, like, so I don't know who is in the Rita community who are teaching in classrooms, but predominantly we are home educators in the Rita community right now. And if I'm in a classroom and I have a group, I'm going to have to, if I'm trying to engage how we build this thing on the wall, you know, I probably would have kids break into groups and each group would create them. And then we would like vote on which groups gets to be the place ones and which group gets to put up the other question words and which group gets to put up their poster. But I would have wanted, I mean, mostly what you want is like, I'm going to assign each group and each group will do one. But I really actually want the process and the learning. So I would want each group to do them all. And then everybody gets one of them up there. And the other ones can take them home if they want or something. I don't know. But if a binder works for you and your child really likes it and they like making their own pages and they don't care about the one that you did as a group, then don't feel the pressure to create that. Okay. The wall needs to do something for you. I mean, I know I've told you all 1,000 times because it's my favorite thing we did. We did a history timeline around, you know, as like a border around our dining room. Well, we love that history timeline. You know, I once handed them a history timeline and they were like, yawn, yawn, and they didn't get it because they're little kids. And, you know, it's hard to appreciate hundreds of years when you're only, you know, 10. But when they're making the timeline and they're the ones gluing it up there and they're the ones who have to move things because we stuck something else here, you know, I mean, that sticks with you. That's real learning. That's engagement. And that's certainly what we want. Okay. So, and I like wall stuff. I do. I just don't think everything. And if you get too many things on the wall, I mean, I don't know about you. I'm like one of those people. I'm a horrible thrifter. I walk into a thrift store and I'm just overwhelmed. I can't find anything, you know. And then I'll go into some like nice store and they just have like a few things here and there. And I find all these things I love. I can't afford them there, but you know, there it is. I can't have too much like visual stuff around me or I just don't see anything. Now, your kids may not be like that. You may be like that. Your kids might be fine. My kids did better with more stuff on the wall than I did. But be aware. There is a point for every child when things become invisible. And if the same things stay in the same place all year, they become invisible. If they're not being used anymore, they're not being decided, hey, we don't need that one anymore. You know, even when you take things down, you know, memory is a funny thing, you know, like kids can go, I'm trying to remember how to spell that WH word, that question word. And I always confuse like who and how. And it's gone now, but I know it was up there and it was right over, you know, and so, oh yeah, now I remember, you know, but that same thing can happen in a binder too. I know where this is in my binder page. I'm on my way to finding it. Oh yeah, now I remember what that page looks like. Now I know how to spell it before I even got there. So, you know, memory's funny. There's a lot of spatial aspects to our working memory that can be really, really helpful. Sound walls are taking sound concepts and putting them up on a wall. Now, again, I think by now you know what I'm going to say. I mean, if you've done our vowel chart class, you know we don't just hand a finished vowel chart to a student ever. They engage in learning, and as they engage in learning, they build their own chart. Now, if you want that chart to be on your wall and they build a chart on a wall, great, great. There are times an older student will come to me and I might say, do you know what short vowels are? Do you know what long vowels are? Do you, and I kind of can tell, like, how much do you know? And they know enough, we like really get the chart started, and then we hit a few things they don't know. And then we might put all that down because they know some of it. I might create a chart that's already mostly done, and then still say, okay, we're going to go back and work on these pieces first and make sure you're really solid at the multisyllable level, right? And then we're going to go and work on these, vowel sounds next. And we're going to add in the ones that you weren't very sure of, and we're going to work on them. And, but that's the only time we're kind of starting out with a lot on a vowel chart, when I have an older student who already knows a lot. So, and I have lots of older students who don't, they're like, I don't even really sure I know what a vowel is. I get that too, so, build it as you go. If every child has their own chart, they have something they personally have created and they have ownership over. If you also have that on the wall, it helps everybody remember what they've learned. Maybe just make sure that wall doesn't become the educator's wall as opposed to the vowel chart, which is the student's material that they own and are in charge of. So sometimes you can get like some mixed messages going. We always want to build in ownership, and sometimes we unknowingly undo that. Other times you built that together, man. I mean, my kids love doing stuff like that, and they took full ownership of it. They didn't think I barely had any part in it at all. They totally thought they owned it. So it worked for them. Just be aware, okay? This led us to this conversation now about vowel charts and vowel valleys and vowel circles and so on. So I wanted to make sure, sorry, hold on one second. I just want to, before I get into the vowels, I want to make sure I addressed everything. Oh, someone asked a question. I'm looking at the questions that you all had put in the rooted community. So I want to make sure I'm still on these word walls versus sound walls. So someone asked, what about displaying word sorts? To me, displaying a word sort is a way of saying, I engaged in this learning. It's kind of like what I was talking about in the beginning. I engaged in this learning. I went through this process. I learned, the 4 most common ways to show E, this long E sound. I maybe even kind of sorted them, like if it tends to be in the beginning of the word or the middle of the word or the end of a word, right? And so maybe we did this word sort, but then we shifted our sort on the table and we said, oh, we noticed these spellings only happen either in the beginning or middle of a word, like an EA. But we don't see EA necessarily at the end of a word, but we really notice that this EY tends to be at the end of a word, right? And say you haven't added the I before EEI, all that. Say you're in these kind of basic, how do we make an E sound? And we notice, the open syllable E, this long E that's represented with a single E letter. That could be, in the beginning or the end, but at the end of, or in the beginning or the middle, but at the end of words, we tend to see, these other things like an EE or something. Okay, so maybe you've kind of created your word sort and now you put it up on the wall and you're marking like this one could be in the beginning or the middle. This one could be in the beginning, middle, end. This one's mostly at the end, blah, blah, blah. And in that whole process, you like did this sort, then you think it, you put it on the wall, and now it sits on the wall and it creates a great reference. That's why people like sound walls. That's why when you're looking more in science of reading, you're seeing that kind of discussion. That's a sound. I hear a long E sound. I'm organizing from the perspective of sound, which is what we believe that the brain does, organizes by sound. but I'm recognizing, that's the phonology part of it. I'm recognizing the orthography part of it, that these sounds are represented because of word history, because of, you know, these word origins, they end up being represented with these different spellings. And I'm trying to remember those spellings. And I'm trying to remember when I see an EE together and when it's an EA in the middle of a word, right? And now we put that on the wall. That's both build it, excited about it, celebrated it, referenced it. And that's why people are liking sound walls better, what they're calling sound walls better. And a word sort could do that. Do you need all the words up there? The fact the words are there, I'm not really sure the words are there so much to help you spell. Although if I'm looking whether the word here is an EA versus the E, the broken EE, which here is it, that kind of might not help me. Speak, is that an EA? And I see the word, yeah, that affirms what I'm thinking. But what I more want is that the words that weren't there in the word sort, that the student can begin to apply what they learned from the word sort and make a really educated estimate of how they think this word's going to be spelled. And then, you know, if they misspelled it still, I'd be like, wow, you knew it was a long E and you knew it was a spelling that had to be in the middle of the word. And guess what? This one happens to be IE, which we haven't learned yet. But, you know, good job. You picked a good option. You know, it's more useful. Okay. So that's what a sound wall does. A lot of things we put in our LA binder could go on the wall and be called a sound, part of a sound wall. What if I want kids to write or label things they draw on their own? All I have to say is teach them how to copy, make sure they're saying sounds as they write, make sure they're not copying letter by letter. So if they like to draw flowers, and first of all, I would have a whole lesson on the word flower. If they really like it and they haven't learned that ow sound yet, I would still say, you hear an ow sound in this word, we spell it this way. You'll learn more about that later, but in the word flower, you see it, this ow sound. And I would make sure that they broke it into syllables. In fact, if I put it on the wall, it probably would have like maybe something, maybe be in parts on cards or something, because how do I want them to copy it? I don't want them going F, L, O, W, where am I on the page, right? I want them going flower. That's how I want them copying that. So that's what I think about that. And then we get into this vowel idea, and we get into this idea of this kind of flexible thinking. I mean, boy, you have to have flexible thinking, right? You can't get through the English language without flexible thinking. I'm not sure you can get through life without flexible thinking. So there's that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I wanted to show you with my document camera some things that I use. In the field of speech path and linguistics, there has been analysis of the shape of the tongue, in which parts of the tongue, believe it or not, this is representing a tongue. And this would be the tongue tip, okay? What is the shape of the tongue when we make certain sounds? And because science needs to be international, they follow an international phonetic alphabet. And so what you see here is the letters as represented in the IPA letters. And then, you know, just some information about what vowel sound that's representing, okay? And so there was this analysis of what exactly is our tongue doing? And the reason this matters is because vowels change based on the shape, the resonance of the oral cavity. And we talk about this in the vowel chart class. And so when we just move our tongue slightly, we have shifts in sound. And also vowel shifts are historically something that is very defining in terms of regional accents. So you have English spoken all over the world, and in some places, words that I might pronounce with this sound, other places are still pronouncing with this sound. Or I shouldn't say still. They are pronouncing it with the sound, and I'm pronouncing that same word with an sound, you know? So you can get this. I have a friend when she is from Scottish Canadian descent, and when she says about, the way I say about, she says a boot. It's a boot, right? And so I'm like, wow, that's like I'm saying an ow sound, and she's saying this sound. There's really this difference in accent in our vowels. Okay. There's a trend to teach kids the International Phonetic Alphabet in an effort to help them really have this appreciation for how pronunciation is really just regional, but spelling is more solid and stable throughout time. And changes more slowly than the way we pronounce words. The way we spell words changes slower than the way we pronounce words. I'm not convinced. I haven't seen the research really supporting teaching a lot of this extraneous information. I think there are a few sounds where that information and a way to represent it, like this, how am I representing versus could be helpful. And certainly I've fallen into problems with that myself when I'm teaching kids, but the teaching IPA still doesn't really help kids map the sound they hear to the spelling they see, which for a struggling learner is their primary goal. So it does give them a way to represent how the same word could be pronounced differently in different regions. And if they are interested in pursuing that kind of information, then you have to have some kind of international alphabet. There's no other way to do it. That same spelling in English is going to look the same. You know, this is one of those words that looks the same across, you know, the Atlantic, but the way it's pronounced is different in different regions. So the only way I can represent that is if I have some system that represents sound clearly to everybody who studies it. But if I always line up this information with this information, that's only going to be true if this is true in your region. Does that make sense? Because someone had asked about, do we really need to do all this extra information? And so the chart that I use at times is one that that is based on a program by Linda Mood Bell, which had taken this idea and had created kind of this vowel circle type system that somewhat represented that. And the problem with their chart was they didn't put in optional spellings beyond a certain level. So they began, first of all, they didn't add the schwa. So that was a little problematic. But what they did is they said, like, this is high smiling lips. This is mouth open. This is rounded lips, closed again, mouth closed again. This represents more the front of the tongue. This represents more the back of the tongue. Then they separated out what they called crazy R's. And then, well, actually, I have a picture. I'm sorry. I actually have a picture of their, where is it? Sorry. I'm like showing you my version of their chart, which is not the same. Here it is. So their chart looked a little bit more like the one that some of you were referencing. And I just pulled this picture off of Google Images, okay? What is difficult about, oh, and so then they separate out diphthongs and they call them sliders. Now, there is debate about the position of this. There's also debate about whether the A sound is really a slider. But this is how Lindemood separates out vowels. And what I like about this is this notion that the short mouth is open. And if you teach kids that you're beginning to round, I like to shift these two up on the stairs, going back up the stairs. If you teach kids that they feel a different kind of rounding and they begin to close a little bit as they round their lips, for ah versus ah, then they can begin to hear this difference. And if their region happens to match up the spelling nicely with that, that can be helpful information. But if in your region, a lot of words that are spelled with just an ah, the short O representation, are mostly pronounced ah, that information might not, this positioning might not be as helpful to you in terms of leading you back to spelling. And then some of you, I tried to pull off a picture of it, but it got really blurry. I think this was Louisa's Moats version of the same thing. And again, if you just put this chart up, you're having to orient yourself. This is Louisa Moats, Val Valley. At least when I put it in the internet. To me, it looks like a lot like Lindemood Bell. And her is in kind of a different position. Her A and E are in a different position. But you don't want to just have this on the wall. That's not really that helpful. Okay. She also added a bunch of word samples, which again, if it's all up there at one time, that's going to be difficult. But if you're building it slowly, it's not as difficult. So back to what I was showing you, what I started doing with this Lindemood vowel circle is I put the E more in the middle. I actually move it up here a little bit more because I want kids to know it's more central. It's just your mouth is kind of not really, your tongue's not really doing anything. It's just kind of sitting in the middle of your mouth. And then we start, I like their word sliders. It's fine. Diphthongs certainly, you know, other than being interesting to say and spell, didn't kind of get the idea across as much as their phrase of slider, that you actually slide your mouth position. I is actually more like this. Ah, open, I. And you is more you. And I like this connection because we land on ooh when we say you, and they share a lot of spelling. So, you know, I share that kind of stuff. But if you notice, what I start adding in for kids is this information about other spelling options. And that part was not part of Lindemood. And then this kind of goes in order of kind of the way, you know, I present it. And again, these are things I share in detail more in the vowel chart class, but and how we introduce them and how, but in the vowel chart class, we just started showing you more the chart rather than the circle. We started doing that because for one thing, this is Lindamu's work. And for another thing, I do think it's really helpful when I first start teaching kids. It didn't feel as sticky in terms of spelling or in terms of their referencing. When they used it, it was like a great teaching tool as we were teaching, but as a reference tool, which was kind of what I was helping you create for them, it was not as easy for them to find their way. It becomes more busy for them. And also what I find, like a lot of things, is what I need to do initially to help kids process sound. Once they're on their way, that kind of information can kind of drop away. And what I found is they didn't really care anymore kind of what their mouth was doing once they could feel the sound and or hear the sound and process the sound. I mean, don't get me wrong. Our brains are putting all this information together. We know where our brains know where our tongue is, where our jaw is, where our lips are. If I say moth versus moot, like I'm my shape of my M is ready for the moth. And mood, my lips are already ready for that ooh. Like everything about what my mouth is doing, my brain knows and is tracking. But it's not, it's at this lower cognitive level, not this higher cognitive level. So when I'm getting to the point where my kids really can hear the difference between ooh and ah, then we're on to kind of a different level of spelling work and vowel work. So you got a little bit of the vowel chart class here, but there are pieces that other people are out there teaching. And I just think, I have to say, I mean, I used that vowel chart for decades, and I will still pull it in when needed for some kids. And then I kind of started doing my own thing because I felt like kids were like stuck there and it wasn't helping their spelling as much. And I definitely needed to add the information about all the different, when we say ooh, what are all the different spellings of ooh and how do they overlap with the spellings of you, and sorting through that information and having it readily available for them to use as a resource can be tricky. Even when they create it all themselves, they can get lost in the crowdedness of that circle, as opposed to this is an ooh card, and on that card I have all that information. So that's why we do what we do. And I think it's always great to know lots of versions and have that information that informs you and pull it out when it's needed and for who it's needed for. So let's see. So Megan says, I felt the same. I like the Valley for the sake of hearing the sounds and seeing how they relate and fit together, but the layout seems more useful for ongoing reference. Yeah. And it's not, and instead of pasting it on the back of the folder, like build it, or take the cards that are in your vowel chart and like build it on the table, and then kind of like talk about like in what ways did the vowel chart reflect some of those aspects, you know? So if you took those vowel chart cards, they're not pasted on the vowel chart yet, or they're already there, but you could take another set of them, and you start saying like, Oh, well, these short vowels are in a row and so are the long vowels. I personally would separate out I, you, ow, and oi. They're such obvious, feel it really, they are different, but at the same time, ow and you are long vowel sounds, right? So, and then how did we connect you and the you and the oo? Like where did we put them in line so that we represented that? And what did we do with these vowel teams that didn't fit in short or long? And then what did we do with these R influenced sounds? And how did we sort it different than the way they sorted it? And by the way, which one do you like better? Do you want to do a combination? Do you want to make a new chart with these cards and put them in this new order because you really think this order is cool? Go for it, right? But do you like that the card houses the spellings, and does that make it a little easier for you? So, I mean, it could be such a cool lesson and deepen everybody's learning, right? So I think that'd be cool. I really cannot say enough how much information builds and grows off prior information, and how often one of you takes something and creates some great idea from it. And it's like, wow, that's great. Or I teach something and then, more research is coming in, and then I've got to go back and make sure that I give a different kind of explanation now for that. And I want to inform you of what's starting to be controversial and what we need to start thinking about. And Megan said, great ideas for starting the review of the school year. Absolutely. Just a reminder, clean out those binders, keep what's needed, remake what's different. If they really know it, toss it out. It's okay. They're done with it now. It served its purpose. Thank you for bringing me, joy. Goodbye, right? It's okay. I forget what it is she says. But anyway, you can do that. I've had kids say to me, I know this now, I can throw this away. And I'm like, let's just keep that one in the back of the binder, because I don't know. I just have this feeling we may end up referencing it again this year, because I'm thinking to myself, you do not know that fully. We are going to need this again. So either do that and then you can pull it forward, or when you need it again, make it again. There's more learning again. So anyway, go for it. I'd love some pictures, honestly. If you have things you have on your wall and it's cool, I'd love to see it. If you end up remaking some things out of this, I'd love to see it. So please share. That'd be great.